You can't serve God and you can't serve wealth at the same time. Does that mean you can't be wealthy and serve God? Absolutely not. There are plenty of wealthy people who are serving God. And that's the gift that God's given them, is the ability to make wealth. And the choices that they make in how they distribute that wealth and what they do with it, well, they need to be making those choices based upon that fundamental choice. But you can't serve that wealth. You can't make that wealth the driving force in your life and serve Jesus at the same time. You cannot do it. And you can put anything else that you find that you ascribe worth to, that we as human beings ascribe worth to, in place of mammon. You cannot serve God and pleasure. You cannot serve God and power. You cannot serve God and wealth. You fill in the blank. There can only be one Lord. One Lord. You know, even talking about serving, in our consumer-oriented society, a lot of people don't consider who they will serve, but they consider what God or religion will serve me. You know, that Calvary Chapel, you know, they don't have enough activities going on. Did you notice that? They don't have those big carnivals for the youth group. They don't have these big concerts every Friday. So, I don't know. It doesn't meet my need. Now listen, I say this to people all the time, and I may have said it to you already. God has a place for you to fellowship and for you to get plugged in. And you're here this morning because you believe that this is the place that God has you plugged in. And someone may come, and some people have come, and they've stayed a while, and then they've moved on because this wasn't the place where God had them to be plugged in. That's fine. People come the first time and they go, "Yeah, we're new to the area and we're looking for a church." Well, I don't put on my plaid jacket and my white buck shoes and go, "Well, let me tell you about Calvary Chapel of Pittsburgh. Here's the stuff that we've got for you. But wait, there's more." And try to sell them on Calvary Chapel of Pittsburgh. That's not what it's about. What I tell them is I say, God has a place for you. And He will lead you to the place where He wants you to be. And here's the litmus test that I believe is at least one of the major litmus tests of whether you are in the right church or not. Are you growing in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ? If you're not growing in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ, then you need to get somewhere where you will. Unless God specifically has you there as a missionary so other people can grow through the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ through you. Now that's a very unique and tenuous situation to begin, and that doesn't happen often, but it does happen sometimes. But for the most part, what I'm saying is, are you growing in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ? And that's what I say to people when they talk about, well, this church has this and this church has this. And this. Okay, those are wonderful things, and things are great, and concerts are great, and carnivals are great. But are we growing in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ? That's the litmus test. It isn't about me following the Lord. Now, I use that phrase a lot. And we're called to do that, to follow the Lord. And in one sense, that is very much what our relationship with the Lord should be. I'm following Jesus. I'm doing what He is leading me to do. I'm not off over here going somewhere and saying, "Lord, come on over here where I am," but I'm following Him. Krista and I were talking yesterday or the day before about sometimes that, we're in the yoke with Jesus and we're walking in the yoke with Jesus, and then we decide, you know what? I've got a better idea. I'm going to slip out of this. I'm going to put on my own yoke, and we'll walk side by side, you and me, Jesus. But I got my yoke, you got your yoke, and we'll go. And then we suddenly realize how heavy that yoke is when Jesus isn't beside us. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. We need to be following the Lord, and yet that has this this feeling to it to me when I say, well, I'm following the Lord. It's like, well, that's my choice, and I'll follow him as long as I like where he's going. As long as I like where he's going. A better phrase is to serve the Lord. A servant does what his master says, whether he likes what his master said or not. And that's what we're called to. We're called to not only follow the Lord, but to serve the Lord. And if you haven't encountered a situation yet in your life, you will. And if you have encountered a situation like this in your life, you'll encounter another one where the Lord will call you to something. You'll see in his word something clearly. Spirit of God will speak to your heart and say, this is what you are supposed to be doing. This is what you are not supposed to be doing. And you'll be going, I don't like that. I don't like the sound of that. I like what I'm doing. It's not bad. It's not sinful. I'm not sinning, Lord. Am I? Well, there's that word we all hate. Obedience. Obedience. God tells us in more than one place in his word, that's more important than your sacrifice. That's more important than your religious duties that you do. That's more important than going to church. That's more important than anything else. Your obedience. Jesus said, if you love me, well, obey me. If you really do love me, well then, do what I say. Thank God for his grace and his mercy and for his understanding of our weaknesses. But those are not licenses to say, he'll understand. No, he calls us to serve him. In whatever way he calls us to serve him. And those ways will be difficult at times. There's another problem with hopping from one thing to another. Wavering between two masters makes us unstable in everything. Turn to the book of James. New Testament, book of James. And take a look at what James says. Chapter 1, starting to read at verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. James tells us to ask in faith. The promise of God is that he will give wisdom to all who ask. He gives to all, James says. He gives liberally to all. He gives without reproach, without saying, well, I don't know about that. Okay, one more time. No, he gives. But we are to ask in faith. Now, this is one of those scripture passages that has been twisted by the so-called faith teachers, who are really, they're not faith teachers, they're teaching selfishness. They're teaching self-centeredness. What James is saying here is not, well, if you really believe it, and if you really say it enough times, you can make it happen. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, here's the promise of God. If you lack wisdom, he gives it to everybody. He gives lots of it to everybody. And he doesn't have an attitude about it when he gives it to you. Wow. But ask in faith, believing that you have received it. What does that mean? You know, some people continue to ask God for wisdom because they didn't like the answer they got.